Houston is sinking. This is not an exaggeration. It is happening right now beneath one of the largest cities in the United States. According to a study published in May 2025, Houston is the fastest sinking major city in the country. More than 42% of the urban area is still going down. In some places, the ground is sinking by more than 10 millimeters a year. In some outer suburbs, that rate exceeds 3 centimeters a year. Those numbers may not sound dramatic at first, but for a city of around 7 million people, they show that this is no longer a small problem. Tamarron makes that very clear. There, one sensor recorded the ground sinking by more than 3 centimeters a year. Part of the neighborhood has already been fenced off. Some newly built homes, not old houses and not abandoned structures, have been declared unsafe to live in. Foundations are cracking. Walls are separating from ceilings. The structure is gradually shifting over time. The people who bought homes there thought they were moving into a new, suburban area that was quiet, clean, and safe to live in. But the thing that is changing is the ground beneath their feet. What makes Houston so dangerous is that this disaster does not arrive in a way people immediately notice. It does not come with one explosive moment like an earthquake or a landfalling storm. It moves much more slowly, much more quietly, and that is exactly why it is easier to ignore. By the time cracks start showing, by the time doors no longer close properly, by the time foundations begin to shift, people realize how far the problem has already gone. And that is when the bigger question becomes impossible to avoid. Why has a modern city, one of the most powerful economic centers in the United States, allowed millions of people to live on ground that is sinking beneath them? But to understand why Houston has sunk this far, you have to start with the ground the city is built on. Houston does not sit on hard bedrock like many other major cities. It was built on soft layers of clay, sand, and silt that built up over a very long period of time. In natural conditions, groundwater inside the aquifers helps keep those layers stable. When that water is pumped out continuously over many years, the soil layers begin to compact, and the ground above them slowly starts to sink as well. That is the process that has been quietly unfolding in Houston since the 1890s, when the city began large-scale groundwater pumping to support rapid population growth and urban expansion. What matters here is that this is not a problem that was only discovered recently. Engineers and regulators have known for a long time that groundwater pumping was causing land subsidence across the Houston-Galveston area. By the middle of the 20th century, many parts of the region had already sunk by more than 10 feet. Shorelines changed. Farmland turned into open water. The damage became serious enough that authorities were forced to require some areas to shift gradually to surface water instead of continuing to depend on groundwater. In the places that made that transition early, the sinking did slow down. But Houston kept expanding, and new development kept moving outward into the suburbs, where groundwater was cheaper, easier to access, and surface water infrastructure had not caught up. And groundwater was still not the only problem. Beneath Houston, another form of pressure had also been pulled away over decades: oil and gas. When those resources are extracted from soft geological formations, the ground below loses even more of the support holding it up. In other words, Houston did not just pump water out from under itself. It also removed part of the deeper support beneath it. At that point, this stops being just a story about geology or weather. It becomes a long-running failure in the way the city developed, because the risk was already visible, the damage had already started, and yet homes and neighborhoods kept spreading into areas resting on ground that was becoming weaker year after year. And once that ground began to shift, the rest of the city could not stay still either. As the ground beneath Houston begins to sink unevenly from one area to another, the damage no longer stops at a few cracked foundations. The bigger problem is that the entire city was built around very precise elevations and slopes. Once the ground starts changing over time, everything above it begins to function differently. Rainwater no longer flows the way it used to. Drainage channels gradually lose their original slope. Roads that once drained after heavy rain now hold water longer. Retention ponds and storage areas are no longer sitting lower than nearby neighborhoods the way they were designed to. Houston is not just sinking. Houston is slowly changing shape. And when the ground changes shape, the layers of protection built on top of it start losing their effectiveness. The most dangerous part becomes clear when a real disaster hits. On August 25, 2017, Hurricane Harvey made landfall in Texas and then stalled over the Houston area for days. Some places recorded as much as 60 inches of rain in less than a week. More than 36,000 homes were destroyed or left uninhabitable. More than 100 people were killed in Texas alone. But the more alarming detail came from the analysis afterward. 85% of the areas that flooded during Harvey were places that had already been sinking before the storm. That means the water did not pour into a city that was still intact. It poured into a city whose ground had already been quietly pulled out of shape over many years. So, Harvey was not just a major storm. It was the moment that exposed every weakness Houston had been building up long before it arrived. When the ground moves unevenly, the pipes buried below it are forced to take stress they were never designed to handle. Water lines can crack, sewer lines can shift. Joints can bend and slowly break over time. Leaking water seeps into the soil, weakens the ground above even more, and can lead to sudden sinkholes in roads or parking lots. Homeowners in Houston may have to spend between $20,000 and $40,000, sometimes more, just to reinforce their foundations. But that is still only the visible part of the damage. The more expensive reality is that the whole city is now living on ground that no longer holds its original shape. And once the land begins to move, the price people have to pay keeps rising year after year. In Houston, the damage is no longer something that exists only on research maps. It is showing up inside the homes people are actually living in. In Tamarron, near Katy and Fulshear, the ground has been recorded sinking by more than 3 centimeters a year. As a result, part of the neighborhood has been fenced off. Some newly built homes have been declared unsafe to live in. Foundations are cracking. Walls are pulling away from ceilings. Structures are slowly shifting over time. These are not old houses falling apart. These are homes families have just bought, just moved into, and just started paying off through mortgages that will last for decades. They did not move into a disaster zone expecting danger. They moved into a place they believed was stable enough to build a long-term life. And then the ground beneath them betrayed that belief. There has been a response from regulators, but it came late. The Harris-Galveston Subsidence District has expanded its oversight, tightened the timeline for shifting from groundwater to surface water, and included western areas in plans to reduce dependence on underground supplies. A major surface water project is also being built to move water from Lake Houston westward through new pipelines and pump stations. Those steps may slow future subsidence. But this needs to be said plainly. They do not save the homes that have already cracked. They do not return sunken areas to where they were before. They do not erase the damage residents were already forced to carry before the problem was finally treated with real seriousness. And that is the hardest part of Houston's story. Residents are not only living with damage they can already see, they are living with the reality that what has been lost cannot simply be restored. Once the clay is compacted, it does not expand again. Once a house has shifted, it does not stabilize on its own. Their homes, the biggest asset most of them have, are losing their sense of safety in the most literal way. And when authorities finally begin reacting more aggressively, that proves one thing above all. This problem has gone too far to keep treating it like a technical warning. And the question left behind is very simple. How many homes have to crack, and how many neighborhoods have to be damaged, before people are willing to admit that Houston was allowed to live with this disaster for far too long? Houston is now doing the work it should have done a long time ago. Cutting groundwater pumping, expanding the surface water network, laying more pipelines, and building more pump stations. Those steps may slow the next stage of subsidence. But one thing needs to be stated clearly. They can only reduce what may still be lost, not restore what has already been lost. Once the ground has compacted, it does not expand again. Once an area has sunk, it does not lift itself back up. A cracked house cannot be treated as if it was never damaged. This is not the kind of crisis that ends once a single project is repaired. Houston will be living with the consequences for many years to come. Uneven sinking makes drainage worse, weakens underground pipes, and makes foundations more vulnerable to damage. That means when heavy rain returns, when another storm moves in, the damage can be amplified in the very places that are already weak. What happened during Harvey in 2017 remains the clearest warning. 85% of the flooded areas were on land that had already been sinking before the storm. That means the disaster did not strike a city that was still intact. It struck a city that had already been weakened from below. And if that weakness underneath is not addressed thoroughly, the price paid next time could be even higher. Houston is no longer just the story of one city. Many urban areas around the world are now facing the same pressure at once. Population growth, overuse of underground resources, aging infrastructure, and more extreme weather intensified by climate change. As rainfall becomes heavier, storms grow stronger, sea levels rise, or droughts last longer. The weaknesses that were once hidden are exposed much faster. Houston makes one thing very clear. Nature does not make a disaster worse on its own. Human decisions and the way cities are built and expanded are what determine how far a risk turns into a crisis. Houston is not sinking because there were no warnings. The signs were there for a long time, but no one stopped it before things became serious. The city kept expanding, while residents kept living on ground that was slowly growing weaker beneath them, without fully understanding the danger. And the question now is this: what other places may already be facing the same problem in silence? If you are living in Houston and have been seeing unusual signs around your area, share what you are experiencing in the comments. And if you want to keep following this story, subscribe to the channel for the latest updates.